Rev up your engines! You've heard me talk about Chevys. I wouldn't buy a modern one because they don't make them like they used to. It's an '07 Tahoe, four-wheel drive, almost the original owner. The original owner gave it to his son, so I'd still say it's the original owner. And what does it have? The original engine, the original transmission, the original four-wheel drive system. It's all there, it's all still working, and none of it has had any type of work done other than changing the fluids. Now, as we look inside, check it out. Yeehaw, it was made in Texas, Arlington, Texas, outside of Big D. This baby's got real leather seats. Well, as real as they get. The part that you sit on is leather, but the backside is vinyl. And the third row seats are all vinyl, but in this case, where are the third row seats? Hey, where are they? I see the second row seats. Well, they are relatively heavy, so he took the third row seats out, stores them in the garage. He uses it to carry stuff around, so he doesn't need the third row seats. But that was one of the big selling points of these. You can pull an awful lot of people around in pretty good comfort. It's a pretty bulletproof V8 engine. Now, the only thing he's got against it is that it has that stupid system that he can turn off cylinders, variable deactivation. He doesn't like it. So he's planning on putting the electronics in to turn it off. But that said, it's got 201,000 miles on it, and it had that system on, and it's still working. He burns about a quart of oil every 2,500 miles. That's really nothing. I see the new ones that burn a quart every 1,000. He doesn't like the annoyance. You get a big truck, you're gonna get bad gas mileage. It doesn't matter what you put on it, and that's kind of a gimmick, but at least it hasn't destroyed his engine yet. It's still the original engine. This is Rhode Island, so you can see anything that's got aluminum on it is gonna look white and corroded like that. Don't let it scare you if you're buying one from up here, because that's just superficial corrosion. Aluminum parts just do that. What you care about is the frame. So let's look under there. And what do we have? Again, a little superficial, but still solid as can be. And look at that big old transfer case for the four-wheel drive. It's clean, it's not leaking, and it still works fine. As I said, it's Rhode Island, so of course, these alloy wheels, they're gonna get corroded when the coating wears off. You can do them over if you really want to. Again, that's totally superficial, it's not gonna hurt anything. A lot of guys will polish them off. The reason they coat them is because they know Americans are lazy. And if they have the pure metal, they know Americans won't polish them and they'll look bad. So they coat them with a clear coat, like women's fingernail polish. Well, what happens, it wears off, then they corrode like that. You see all the American motorcycles do the same thing. They look horrible, especially Harleys after a few years. You paint something metal, the paint's gonna come off eventually, and the wheels get hot from braking, and of course it gets flaky. Doesn't hurt anything, and they don't lose air, but it looks a little bad. You can fix them up if you want. If you're lazy, take them to a place and they'll do it for you. They'll do them all over, or you know, you can just spray paint them yourself. Now, he doesn't tow with it, but his father towed a 22-foot fishing boat. That's why he got this with a four-wheel drive. And he had no problems at all towing anything like that. It's an enormous amount of space. That's why people buy these things. On the highway, he gets about 16.5 miles a gallon top gas mileage, which isn't bad for something this big and this heavy. And granted, this is real gas mileage on a real four-wheel drive vehicle. This isn't some fantasy EPA made up on a dyno. This is in the real world. You can set it any way you want. Automatic 2, 4 high, 4 low. Relatively sophisticated systems. Start up, starts right up. Still sounds smooth with 200,000 miles. You put it in gear, it doesn't shake at all. V8s are always notorious for being smooth vehicles. Now the seatbelt light's on because I'm not wearing a seatbelt at the moment, so that we don't care about. Got a lot of comforts on it. It's new enough that it has things you want, but not as insane as those modern ones. They got a little bit carried away with electronics, and other than that stupid cylinder deactivation that can be taken off, they're solid built cars. Now I gotta say, it's a solid vehicle, but, and this is typical in this country these days, he took it in to get inspected. He took it to a GMC dealer afterwards, and the guy decided that, oh, it needed some work. It needed $6,000 worth of work. Now, I don't know what these guys have in their mind when they do that. You see an old truck with 200,000 miles, even if you're a dishonest mechanic, dealer, whatever, you must have some kind of business sense. And the business sense would be, hey, don't try to sell a guy with an old truck $6,000. Maybe try to sell him $600 or $1,000 worth of stuff, but not $6,000 worth of stuff. Now, granted, the rear airbags went out ages ago, but he's been driving them 6 years that way. He doesn't care. Like I say, he's not towing. He's not carrying heavy weights. He doesn't care. But a lot of this stuff was make-believe. They told him he needed ball joints. Now, interestingly enough, years ago, he had the ball joints done. Now, I'm assuming these clowns at the dealership just see, here's an old truck, so we'll sell him ball joints because it's got 200,000 miles. They didn't know the history that had been changed before. Well, guess what? It didn't need ball joints. He took them apart, looked at them. There was no play, nowhere. He's driving on a highway. It doesn't shake. It doesn't clunk. Just total BS. And that was, of course, just part of the deal. They didn't want to just sell them the ball joints. They wanted to sell them the whole control arm assembly because what are they at these dealers? They're parts changers. And they're selling you their parts with their markup. Always take it with a grain of salt when they're trying to sell you stuff like that. He didn't even need them to begin with, which is the disgusting part. But they could have just replaced the ball joints, but they didn't need replacing. So you're going to see this all over the country. Here in Rhode Island, Texas, Tennessee. I mean, the problem with these dealerships are they have these immense overhead, millions of dollars a year. They got to pay that before they even break even. So they just try to gouge all of their customers as much as they possibly can. And they hope that most of them, or at least some of them, 1 out of 10, will say, okay, yeah, do it. I feel unsafe. And they're almost always going to tell you, your car's unsafe. You can't drive it that way. And he just told me that's exactly what they told him. Just like the other day when I had that Toyota Sienna and they told it needed a rear differential for thousands of dollars. And then he took it to his independent mechanic. He said there's nothing wrong with it. They told him it's unsafe. The rear end could lock up. You could spin off the road and be killed. With him, that was over a year ago. It doesn't make any noise. It hasn't locked up. He drives it all over the place. It's the same thing. You just can't trust these people anymore. Sad but true. Now, as you can see, you're high up. You feel comfortable. Even though the airbags on the suspension in the back are blown, it still rides decently. Just don't overload it. Fix them. You can always put aftermarket ones on. It costs a lot less. Let's step on it and see how it accelerates. You can hear that engine kick in. It shifts perfectly fine. Got good acceleration. 200,000 miles. There's a lot more left in this. It has most things, but it doesn't have a sunroof. Why? Because his father, who gave him the car, knows they leak over time. He wanted something that would last forever and not have problems. Smart move. Really, what do you need a sunroof in a truck for? It's got air conditioning. The air conditioning still works. Why would you need a sunroof on something like this? You don't. So he didn't get it. And here we go, 201,000 miles later. It's still working fine, and it doesn't leak. Now, again, I have to warn you, if you want to get one of these, get one of these older ones. The AC is still ice cold, and he said they've never touched it. They've never even added refrigerant, okay? If you remember, last year when I was in Houston, I had one that was 1.5 years old, and the AC was broken already because the idiots made the condensers in the front poorly, and they all leaked, and you had to replace the condenser on a 1.5 year old GMC truck. They just don't make them like they used to. He wants to keep it forever, and basically, not a bad idea. Everything wears out eventually, but this is a conventional V8 engine. There's many different engines you can put in it, and of course, as they age, the laws change too. Here in Rhode Island, they have a very interesting law. Once your vehicles are over 20 years old, you don't have to get them inspected anymore for emissions. So you could put in a 350 crate engine, supercharger, whatever you wanted, and you don't have to worry about all that EPA BS. What have we learned today? We learned that you gotta analyze everything fully. Yeah, I'm not a Chevy fan, but an 07, 200,000 miles, still runs, shifts good. Engine tranny, never been touched. AC still blows cold, never been touched. Made in Arlington, Texas, where they care about how they build stuff. This is long before the day that the differentials came from Mexico or they're even built in Mexico. They were better made. He wants to make this thing last forever. He's got a good chance at it. Hey, eventually the engine wears out, put another engine in it. Put another transmission if it finally goes out. For the price of a new one, those astronomical figures, he could put in 15 or 20 engines and transmissions. And here's some bonus questions and answers. U.S. Air Force dozer pilot says, 2015 to 2021 F-150 rear axle rust. Has anyone else seen this? My 2015 has more rust than it should. I've even seen the newer ones have it. What's the story? It is too much rust. And the geese agree. They're having a little honk fest here. Luckily, it's superficial rust. It looks bad, but that's all solid steel, and what you see is a superficial rust. They're obviously not painting them right, sealing them. They must have done something something wrong and you see all the superficial rust. And I have seen ones that are 6 months old and they're rusty as can be. But it's superficial rust. That's a solid rear end. You know, there's a lot of heavy steel. It doesn't really mean anything. It makes Ford look bad. I mean, you can imagine somebody buys a new truck, they look under, they say, look at all this rust. It just looks bad. So if I were you, Ford, I would paint them better, seal them better with something, because it looks bad. Now, it really doesn't mean anything, because that steel is real thick, but it looks bad. So Ford, you should do something about it. You're doing something cheaper than you used to do. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.